Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. My name is Ali Al-Sayegh, VP of Internal Communications and Employee Engagement with EDNOC. This interview is part of the virtual Majlis series, brought to you by EDNOC Insights in support of volunteers.ae. What is the future of our global economy? And how do governments address the post-COVID-19 challenges? To answer these questions, I have asked for insights from Mr. Tony Blair, Executive Chairman of the Institute for Global Change and former Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Hello, Mr. Blair, and thank you very much for joining me for this virtual conversation.
Thank you.
Let's start with the first question. What is the likely impact of COVID-19 on the global economy? Do you have a timeline for a return to the status quo?
So I think COVID-19 is the biggest crisis for the world economy that we've faced since the middle of the 20th century and the aftermath of World War II. Most projections indicate that economic growth globally will drop by possibly as much as 3%, which is devastating. It's about twice the amount of the financial crisis in 2008-9. And the problem is it's unlike any other crisis because it's not a crisis that's been an economic crisis. It's an economic crisis triggered by a health pandemic. And so the issue is when you try to revive the economy again, how do you build the infrastructure of containing the disease so that people feel confident again about going out and living a normal life? And until there's a vaccine, which could be a year away, 18 months away, maybe sooner if we're lucky, but we can't be sure. Until we get a vaccine or some form of therapeutic reduces the severity of the disease, then we're going to have to build a whole infrastructure of containment. A bit like post 9/11, we had to build the infrastructure around security. This time we'll have to build it around this health pandemic. So the result of all of that is that the disruption to the world economy is going to be large in the short term and hard to predict right now in the medium term. But for sure, it's going to be large. And even an economy like China is suffering huge falls in GDP. So this is, it's the most serious economic crisis, which is going to require a whole set of things to be done nationally and globally as well. And this is where we really need the big nations of the world to come together and to plot a revival of the global economy and make sure that we don't go back into kind of economic nationalism and protectionism, which could make the whole situation worse.
How will the global economy look and feel after all of this is over?
I think the normal we return to is going to be a new normal. I mean, it depends how deep and severe the shutdown is. And that, as I say, depends on issues around things like vaccines and therapeutics. But even having shut down for this period of time, the economic consequences of certain sectors is going to be enormous. Well, it's hard to see how that is maintained. So you're going to have, for sure, there's going to be not just a new normal in the way we interact with each other, but some business sectors will really suffer. Others, like the technology sector, may do better. But I think it's one of these things where now, because there's still so much we don't know about the disease, about how we can cope with the disease, this is where, for economists, normally they put a whole lot of information into their economic models, and that information is reasonably stable and predictable. In this occasion, it's completely unpredictable. So I think it's very hard to be clear, but for sure the damage is going to be, I think, it's going to mean that every business, organization, government, country has got to reconsider how it's structured and how it's organized for the future.
Mr. Blair, you've mentioned a number of industries that are key to the UAE's economy. Tourism, hospitality, oil and gas for sure. How well do you think the UAE's economy has reacted to COVID-19? Are there certain examples of policies that you think the UAE's adopted that we can adopt elsewhere?
Well, I think in respect of the UAE's performance on the COVID-19 containment, I think it's been one of the best countries in the world. In fact, what's actually interesting, and I put behind me, you'll see the biography of Sheikh Zayed, who is, of course, the founder of the UAE. And what's interesting is that those countries that have got good executive government, in other words, the governments are competent, they tend to set targets and meet them. They tend to operate in a particular way with a particular level of competence. The interesting thing is those are the governments that got ahead of the crisis and managed to contain it. The problem for the challenge for the UAE is going to be that it just happens to be very dependent on certain sectors that are obviously very, very affected by the crisis. So I think it will take time for the UAE economy to adjust. But the one thing I've learned about the leadership here is that they are far-sighted. I think even before the crisis, they were looking at how they became not so dependent on oil. ADNOC, as your organization, has obviously undergone massive change in the past 2 or 3 years or so. And you will be looking to think, how do we turn ourselves into an energy hub and not necessarily just an oil hub? I think you're going to build a technology sector in the UAE that will be very vibrant for the future, and the tourism will come back eventually. So I'm actually quite confident about the UAE sort of medium and long term. I mean, it will just have to get over the shock in the short term.
Stay tuned on our virtual Majlis for the second part of this interview.